Well, welcome to Perspectives from WFSU Public Media. I'm Tom Flanagan. This program using the Zoom platform, pre-recorded on Tuesday, March 23rd for playback on Thursday, March 25th in its entirety. And the show will be aired on WFSU FM and also be archived on WFSU.org. You know, as long as there's been a Tallahassee, there have been sections of town that do not share in the overall prosperity gains in the community at large. And that is not only within the metropolitan area, that extends out into the more rural environs as well, for sure. There have been pretty regular, sometimes sporadic initiatives to change this reality, though. But really, none of these has been able to make the sweeping and long-lasting changes that were envisioned at the outset of those efforts. So now there's a new coalition of people and groups. They are determined to turn that history on its head, and we're going to meet and talk with several of these visionaries on our perspectives now. So let's go around the old Zoom screen and see who we can hook you up with here telephonically. First is Miaisha Mitchell, Executive Director, Greater Frenchtown Revitalization Council, highly attuned to Tallahassee's historical racial segregation and displacement. Of course, she's also involved in 32304 Plus, Prosperity for All Summits, the Greater Frenchtown Southside Strategic Investment Plan, a host of other organizations throughout the community. Miaisha Mitchell, it is such a pleasure to hear your voice after a long hiatus. How are you doing?
Well, I'm hanging in here, Tom. I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Everything is fine with my family and all the folk I've been working with. Thank you.
That is wonderful to hear, Miaisha, and can't wait to catch up on you for all the things that you've been doing in regards to what we just mentioned here to get us kicked off. So we will do that moving forward here. Let's move right next door and say hi to Dr. Tom Taylor, collaboration specialist for the FCRC Consensus Center at Florida State University. Now retired, he claims, but don't believe him for a minute here. The center, by the way, in case you don't know, provides facilitation services on a range of policy issues, including water, land use, transportation, civic engagement. The list goes on and on. Tom, thanks for joining us today on the show.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here. And I've just, I guess one comment is, you know, there's lots of people doing good things to try to address the inequity in this community that has the greatest inequity of any community in the country, according to one study. And there's still a need to do more, and we'll hopefully explore that today.
I think we can get into some great detail on that, Tom, and thank you for having your expertise brought to bear on all this. Next up, Talethia Edwards, founder and organizer, Tallahassee Forward Collective, community organizer in the Bond Neighborhood First Plan, a vision for the Tallahassee Forward Collective, and many, many other things. Miss Talethia, good to see you, ma'am.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
Next, we're going to say hi to Freddy Branham, Executive Director, Emergency Care Help Organization, but everyone knows it as ECHO, the evolution of ECHO from crisis management to helping find jobs and succeed at work, and beginning an employed resource network to enhance workforce stability for the benefit of both employers and employees is now part and parcel of the mission and vision for that organization. Freddy, thanks for being part of it today.
Thanks, Tom. I'm what you call a long-time listener, first-time participant on your show. So thanks.
It's a pleasure to have you on, sir. And we could not, of course, do this without Bart Bilber, because he's the founder and CEO of the iHOPE Incorporated LLC, and has been very much a spark plug in trying to maybe bring a new collaborative spirit to so many of these organizations, which have been laboring in the trenches for many, many years, but sometimes in perhaps a less connected way than they could. So Bart, thank you, sir, for again suggesting this. You also, and let's get this out of the way here, and we'll circle back around and talk about it again later in the program. You have a major community event that is coming up, right?
Yes, on Friday at 9:30, we have a virtual forum entitled United to Ensure Prosperity for All of Leon County. And it is being facilitated with Fasig Brooks, one of our sponsors. And so if you go to a Fasig Brooks Facebook page, you can register. On my Facebook page, which is iHOPE Inc., you can register, and hoping for a good conversation on how to reduce poverty and set a poverty reduction goal for our community.
Bart, if you would for a moment, talk a little bit about the genesis of the iHOPE program, how it came to be, and your commitment to this overall a vision of a more equitably prosperous community, if you would.
The history of iHOPE is that I got involved in the Village Square forums on race relations and got very involved, and soon desired to take actions rather than just have dialogue about it. But ultimately concluded that our community is doing tremendous work on trying to improve race relations and address these issues, but that unfortunately, it's hard to find out what is happening until after the fact. So the first creation was the iHOPE website, which is intended to be a clearinghouse of all things related to improving race relations, crime prevention, and poverty reduction. Then in 2018, lots of big headlines about the 32304 zip code. Of course, that zip code has the highest childhood poverty rate in the state of Florida. And Commissioner Bill Proctor asked Mayor Daley to have a summit to finally address this serious childhood poverty rate. And I approached Commissioner Proctor and offered the assistance of iHOPE to organize the summit, which turned into 4 summits. And fortunately, Tom Taylor and Miaisha Mitchell joined me. And so in these 4 summits, we generated a report, an outcome that we'll talk more about. And that has led now to the conclusion that we need to set a poverty reduction goal, and we need to create a leadership roundtable, a collective impact approach to reducing poverty. And that's the focus of the forum on Friday and what we'll discuss today.
Well, you talked about Miaisha Mitchell, and if anyone has been connected to a lot of these sorts of initiatives on a seemingly endless basis, Miaisha, that is you. Give us an update, a status report, if you would, on what is going on in Frenchtown right now and how you see this particular initiative moving that effort forward even more.
Well, one thing I'm so excited about is that at this moment, many of the organizations in our community are taking a great look at equity, diversity, and inclusion. And for me, this is perfect because when we think about equity, we can actually include all the things that I've been talking about for years in terms of making access to services available to families who need them, recognizing those families who are impacted mostly by these issues as being a critical part of helping to solve those. And so when we talk about equity and inclusion and diversity, we're going to think not only outside of the box, but to collaborate on some of the things that are required to get the job done. And I remember very clearly in our summit, the summit one where we talked about the resources that were available in our community, the providers who are providing those services, what may they do and the kinds of things they see could be changed in our area. And then by summit 2, we looked at the stories of the people. It was so exciting to see that happening. And now trying to do the refined strategies to help people to determine which is the best way to go with dealing with poverty in our community and prosperity, because we want to do asset mapping a lot more. We've been in a lot of poverty deprivations, support issues and money going after poverty forever. But the assets and the challenges to getting people to a level playing field, for a better word, a phrase, is what I've been really trying for years to work on. And I'm so happy to see some of the great collaborators I've been working with for years also continuing to do this. So in Frenchtown, one thing I think is happening is the neighborhood first planning process. Vaughn has done one, and Talethia is on, she could probably talk about that, but I'm thinking those processes by the Neighborhood Affairs Division at the city has really put a face to what the people are saying they want. And so the challenge now is to get folks who really want to be a part of this engagement community-wide, who are the stakeholders who have commitment to this, to think, with broader term lenses of equity first, and then how might the people's voices be coupled with that, and then how they could become part of the wealth production of all the various activities we've seen in our community over the years. So for me, the neighborhood plan has all the pieces and parts that the folks have said they want. Those providers of services can take a look at those plans. They are on the website. And then what planning you have going forward should definitely include what the people have already said. And I think if we move that direction and do a collaborative effort, we're going to be on the road to addressing the poverty in our area and moving people to prosperity, for that matter.
You mentioned Talethia Edwards, so let's segue over to Talethia and talk a little bit about how you see Tallahassee Forward Collective, your organization, tying into this, particularly as Miaisha said, so many of these neighborhoods feel like, well, folks come in and tell me what I should want. Well, I know what I want, but no one will listen to me.
So the idea of Tallahassee Forward was not for it to be an organization, but a collective space that by which community could come and work, right? So we work in so many silos. We talk about Bond and Frenchtown and Griffin Heights and North Side, South Side, and we're always having these sector conversations when we all live in this one city, right? And really in neighborhoods like ours in Frenchtown, the issues mimic each other, right? They mirror. We can look at the report and what the disparities are, and they look the same. So the idea of the Tallahassee Forward Collective was to attempt to provide a community space that could tackle these issues, poverty, crime, mental health issues, all of these in a flat hierarchy space. No one owns the space. So it's no one really to answer to except ourselves, and that our voices would then inform policy so that change can actually happen, right? And so these big issues like poverty that we can't all agree on where to start, in the collective impact model, we can all working together, pooling our resources and our intellectual capital and our human and social capital together, can begin to tackle one issue at a time. And if that is beginning with how do we reduce the poverty rate, the poverty reduction rate, or setting a goal for that, that needs to happen out of a silo, right? And it needs to happen as a whole community, being informed by the voices from the different spaces that are saying this is what we need and this is how we move forward. So that is what Tallahassee Forward aims to do. We really like to put faces and people and egos with movements. So I haven't been able to divorce myself from it, but I'm hoping to actually push it and maintain the integrity of a community space that is a collective impact model. Me and Bart talked a lot about continuing to push that word collective impact, because we can't do it by ourselves. We really have to do it in coalition with each other. And then I'm hoping we'll see some change.
Let me grab Freddy Branham here with Echo. One of those components which always comes to the fore when you're talking about income inequality is the availability of jobs, of employment. And so many of our neighborhoods do not have the kinds of jobs in the infrastructure surrounding it that really would lend themselves to a lot of folks who are not now employed going out and getting employment. So what resources are available to, again, kind of create jobs from scratch? Is that what's needed, or do we have to do the old economic development route? We're going to bring in a factory, stick it on the south side of town somewhere, maybe a couple 300 jobs, and that'll do us. What do we do?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Tom. One thing, Echo's here celebrating this year is our 40th anniversary of service, and that starts with a single instance of changing the trajectory of somebody who was in crisis. Let's just leave it. I mean, let's not get into poverty statistics, federal thresholds, anything like that. But one person who came in that had recently been unemployed, had a carload of family members, didn't know where to turn for resources or food or anything, I guess, a place to sleep, didn't have a suit or a shirt or a tie to go interview for something. and just happened to cross paths with the founder of Echo. Long story short, the food was provided to get them by for a couple of days until maybe that day labor kicked in. An interview was set up on the spot to go get in, talk with an employer who had a job at least available for that person to go interview for. The family was connected to the shelter that used to be downtown at that point. And so, you started chipping away at those couple of hierarchy of needs that these people were experiencing just in a very temporary, instant state. Over those 4 decades, we probably got into a little bit more of the serving people where they are without really the intention of lifting them out of it, and just the repetitive cycle of just continuing to feed something that's there without really a boost to get them up the next rung up the ladder. And without getting too altruistic here, now the iteration of what Echo is really trying to do is let's work from the top down. Let's find actually the jobs that are out there, maybe a little bit underpaid, but there are some fair wages in town by employers here that are trying to pay people a right wage for the value that they're going to bring to that employer. But what if we were to boost that employer by making their people more productive, keeping them on the job, that then moved them up the ladder and freed up the job that was in that more entry range, more an easier reach to where that lowest rung on the ladder was a little bit more attainable than trying to start from ground zero to maybe an artificially inflated level in terms of wages or something like that. So how do you free up that low rung of the ladder with somebody who's already on that rung, and then move them up to the second rung up, and then work your way up and continue to go down as far as you need to improve our community overall?
So it sounds like it's one step at a time triage, sort of, kind of.
It's just hard to do one step at a time when you're talking about 110,000 households in Leon County that could truly benefit from some sort of intervention. If you look at those numbers, a quarter of that population, or almost half of that population even, is in that tenuous range. Some are employed and some are not. So how do you get those to above that mid-level range to get the next one down up?
Okay, and establishing those connections, because a lot of these folks are not just gonna, let me check out the available jobs that you have at Career Source Capital Region. I know their phone number by heart. That's not what you're dealing with here usually.
Correct.
Okay. Tom Taylor, got one for you, because as Talethia had mentioned, you're looking at neighborhoods that have been established and may not be desirable neighborhoods in the minds of many people, but it's home. It is where people live. And whenever you get into land use, especially, you have things like the Boynton Still incident, where you have developers come in and kind of take over an established neighborhood, and you wonder, what are you going to do with the folks who were displaced by those movements? It may look a bit nicer now, but it still has a human impact. Are those some of the considerations that you're looking at too, as we go through this whole process? You're muted there, Tom. Thank you.
I look at a lot of things in a lot of different ways. With my urban planning hat, clearly we are looking at those neighborhoods, and it's a real challenge. I think I worked with Talethia in Bond and in Griffin Heights, and particularly like Griffin Heights, it's right there. Basically, half the neighborhood's been taken over by student housing, and what's going to keep the rest of that happening? And so efforts to fix up houses and fix up the neighborhood could just be making it easier for that takeover. And so we really need to do these things in a way that we are helping as many renters get into a home ownership situation. I think nonprofits, whether it's cooperative housing or nonprofits, but somehow we need to secure that housing so the prices of rent and purchase don't just keep escalating and basically evacuating, the long-term residents out of that neighborhood. And so if you think about the people in Griffin Heights or Bond, they need some help. They may not be able to have a job because they don't have child care or elder care or health care. And so, you know, you need to look at the whole family budget. And you just talked to, and Freddie talked about jobs. That's essential. But these other costs to a household are things that we can have an influence on. And it's all these things have to work together. I think one of the things that the summits did, and I think that Talesia's Tallahassee Forward, you know, is doing, and that is getting people to not all come together and do everything together, but to do what they do, you know, on their own, and together do those things that no one group can do by themselves.
Okay, Bart Bilber, does iHOPE then work as a coordinator, an organizer of all these various resources to say, okay, this organization, you work with these guys over here to accomplish this task. Meanwhile, these other people over here can tackle this different situation. Who kind of calls the shots as to who does what to whom to when?
Well, first off, the community needs to make decisions. It's not up to iHOPE. I would say at this point, iHOPE is leading a conversation. Through the summit process, it was identified that a collective impact to reduce poverty program out of Canada has been enormously successful in over 330 cities and 80 regional roundtables. And they also generated a program in central Iowa. And those programs have been enormously successful in reducing poverty. And it was realized that they couldn't reduce poverty until they had established a all sector collective roundtable. They were doing a lot individually in their silos, but they really weren't moving the needle until they joined together as a collective. So at this point, iHOPE is just trying to get our community aware of that option, informed about these successful communities, and making a decision. Shouldn't we become a part of the Vibrant Communities Network, reducing poverty through a collective impact approach? So I would say at this point, iHOPE's primary purpose is to stir the community conversation. Again, we're trying to discuss setting a poverty reduction goal. We've had about the same level of poverty here for at least a decade, and remarkably, nobody's ever had a conversation about, you know, maybe we should try to reduce it. What do you think we could do if we all worked together towards that? So we're going to have that conversation. And lastly is another national program called Bridges Out of Poverty. And that is a curriculum that's been around for 25 years with the purpose of helping better understand those that live in poverty, their worldview, their challenges, their resources, their language, casual versus a more formal type of language that's the expectation for us in middle-class America and those trying to get a job. And so I think at this point, we're trying to introduce these throughout the community for a discussion that these are programs that are existing, they're time tested, we can start them right now. We don't need to start from scratch. We need to bring these successful programs to our community.
So
you know, sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead, Talethia, go ahead.
What I was gonna say is that as I'm listening to this, and I think that it's all good, right? And you need, number one thing you need is resources, but secondly, as a community leader, someone on boots on the ground who's walking and got lived experience with all of this, when I begin to hear all these terms and, you know, Bridges Out of Poverty, not criticizing it, is great. I use it, I read it, right? But it makes us who live in poverty in these communities sounds kind of like lab people, right? Like little lab rats, the language of and the look of poverty and all of this. And really what I see this, poverty is so huge. And of course, it includes the jobs, the housing, and education, all of those things. But what I see as well is this internalized identity of those living in poverty that we haven't talked about. That relationship building and trust building and one-on-one hand holding sometimes that it requires to walk a person out of poverty so that they can begin to have personal, in their own personal life successes, and then in their family life successes, and then community successes. They can become a part of it. But that is a process that I see that we miss. We want to talk about creating this poverty reduction goal, and I believe in it. I think as leaders, that's our conversation to have. But when you get down to the boot level of what's going on and people living in poverty, you have to go back to that relationship building, holding your hand. Okay, what do you need? You need childcare. I'm going to help you with that resource. You now need transportation. I'm going to help you with that resource. You now have a job, so you need to learn how to manage that budget because you have not had this money. I'm going to teach you how to do that. And so I know that sounds slow, but that is how things in communities change. And what happens, so much was said because Tom talked about the neighborhoods and development and displacement. I think advocacy needs to start way before development happens, but these conversations happen in rooms that people who are living in poverty don't have time to be in.
Yeah, you know, in terms of what Talethia is saying, though, I think you're right. Relationship building is really important, and making sure, I know in healthcare, we talk about PCORI, putting the patients in the center, putting the people in the center, and the citizens themselves being actually engaged in all of these aspects from the beginning to the end. And with Freddy's idea around starting from the top, I agree, but also we have to work up from the bottom. So, you know, in the middle, we can meet somewhere. The idea of systemic impact is so critical, you know, because I know based on personal experiences, having had that systemic dislocation, displacement of my family during the 60s from Smoky Hollow, that had an adverse impact on me. So I am a sufferer of the ACEs, you know, the ACEs, because that displacement we don't know enough about. We know land development comes in and goes out, and it takes 30 to 40, 50 years actually to get the plan in place before the people realize that they have been pushed out and nowhere to go. So imagine all the systems that are now in place to not even welcome you, but to sort of keep you from even getting together as a family again. Because I know we were impacted by housing, you know, because HUD at the time was not taking extended family members, you know, there's nothing like that. They were dealing with nuclear families. And so having come from Smoky Hollow, we had aunties and uncles and grandparents in them. All of those folks were part of our immediate family. And so that kind of thing is something that we don't even think about, that long-term impact and what that means for, as an adult where I am now, you know, what that meant all those years in my growing and learning. The transportation system, nobody had cars, so in the community, you had one person with a car, and that person helped you get around. But now folks are scattered all over impacted Tallahassee, and everybody in the other communities experiencing the same kinds of things. We don't know that because we don't have a global view of what's happening. People don't have the telephones. Even at that time, we didn't have a phone. And so communication was odd. So putting the citizens and telling their stories and having research that reflects that, so that the research is not about the quantitative stuff, those numbers you keep talking about, but the quality of life, you know, what happened to the people who were impacted by those types of changes in their life. So poverty is about income, yes, but it's about quality of life. It's about making sure people have that one level up, and that when we talk about equity, that we recognize that equity is just not about, you know, getting people all money, but the resources that are there and making sure that all of our kids have that, you know, and that we're recognizing that as a critical component of what we do in all the human services. So we all need to have a sort of a common lens moving forward in our work, in our allocation of resources. So at all levels, top to the bottom, bottom to the top, we have to work it together in order to make it, because it can't be either or, because if we do either or, we're ending up another 20, 30 years down the road, and we're still where we are now today. Same script, same thing happening. So I encourage us to keep going. And Kim, I want to say to you, I think you're on the call. I really appreciate the work we did with you guys with Unnatural Causes. When I review that documentary, I still see the same things. I haven't seen those changes in the social determinants of health. And I think that at this point, we've really got to take this thing serious unless we're going to continue this along this route. The talking, yes, but actually action is here. We got to make action, take action time to work on behalf of all the people who are impacted.
Miaisha, you referenced Smoky Hollow and the displacement of the many families there that were caught up in the redevelopment, if we want to call it that, of that particular minority neighborhood back in the earlier days of Tallahassee. Another example of that happened in Frenchtown proper, in the name of trying to bring more affordable housing to the area. You remember this, the development at 1010 North Macomb Street, which was
I do.
Provide, great housing for people who didn't have much in the way of income. And it turned into our own version of Cabrini Green and finally had to be demolished. When you got the community involved, what do we have now? The Goodbread neighborhood, which is a vast improvement over what was there before.
Yeah, but Tom, the thing about that most people don't know is that those families who were displaced were told that they could come back at the same level of income, in terms of poverty, not poverty, but based on their housing ability to pay. So 30%. When the building was actually completed, 80% of those people couldn't return because market rate had changed. So the 30% that they had been promised wasn't happening. So maybe for 5 or maybe 9 families, I believe, were able to actually come back into that. So there's a lot of in the systems, things change. While they tell you that you can come back and resume in these beautiful housing, that didn't happen for most of those families. They are still out. Many of them are still suffering. They're still in poverty. Many areas in Tallahassee, I know them because I worked with them for years. I lived in that area, lived in Goodbread. So these things are not just, looking good in terms of the bricks and mortar. There's so much more underneath that the stories have not been told and the impact that those people have suffered.
That brings us back to you, Freddy Branham, when it comes to that approach to not just, oh, you need affordable housing. Fine, here's an apartment. Oh, you need a job. Here, talk to this guy first thing Monday and he'll set you up. This is a very holistic approach that we have to take in solving these problems then.
Absolutely. Miaisha hit it on the head. This isn't top to bottom or bottom to top. These are not mutually exclusive ideas. These are not only meet in the middle, but grab arm in arm and keep climbing up. Talethia mentioned most of the common terminology we're using here is all about resources. Who's got resources, who doesn't. Our clients are probably the most resourceful people that are in this community, but they're not full of resources, right? They're lacking that connection and link to something that's going to improve whatever their trajectory is. But I think that from the holistic perspective that you mentioned, when we include and take that next, layer of the onion going outward from the core of doing the asset mapping and the building up on somebody's strengths, rather than just looking at some liability zip code in the community that needs to have things poured into it. When we're building it from, all right, here's our core that we're now improving upon, or at least providing links to things that can be improved upon, then you bring in the education system, perhaps the faith system, the employer, the private sector. We've underutilized the private sector for so long. I'm guilty of it. I would call them to ask for board memberships or sponsors to a golf tournament without thinking that they've got their own employees who could potentially benefit from the work that we do day in and day out. And the next, what we're building and trying to grow up now from the employer side, hopefully I'll get a chance to speak to, but we've got some things in the work coming up next month that are going to even strengthen that even further to make it a more even business centric, something that private sector can really pick up on. But, the point I would make is when I think Amber Tynan over at United Partner in Human Services, she carved out some space in the Tallahassee Democrat early in 2020. And this is pre-pandemic. This is before anything really as disastrous as happened last year came about. And she focused on the tale of two tallies, right? And so there were zip codes involved. There's 32312 on maybe the higher end. There's 32304, which is the notorious on the lower end. But we forget that the same two Tallahassees exist in the classroom. They exist in our church pews. They exist in our workplaces. And the closer we can get to introduce those two parties that are the tale of two Tallahassees, whether you call them the have-nots, the under-resourced, the full of resources. Either way you look at it, it's not some completely separate, segregated language barrier necessarily. It's a lot closer to the best than we realize. And I think that if anything, 2020 brought that about, that so many more new people that we thought were in good shape or that we thought were stable were on the cusp of falling down that ladder we keep talking about. And so the cool part about it was we actually knew who they were. We knew their story. We knew their identity, like Miaisha said, that we knew what resources we could help at least alleviate and then hopefully reduce any permanent damage that they were going through.
Well, Freddie, you talk about the private sector, but Tom Taylor, you also got the public sector. And we know, being in the town we are, that not much gets done unless you have complete and total buy-in, certainly with local government, but hopefully with state government too. They've got to be players in this, don't they?
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of take a bigger view and then go down to the people view. And the 211 Big Bend has a listing of programs, agencies, and they've got about 2,000 agencies that provide around 4,000 services. But if you go down to the person that shows up at ECHO and says, hey, I got a problem, you know, how do you connect to this larger effort to do things? And there's lots of good people doing things, but it's not the most efficient community-wide system. And so you ask about the public sector. I think the public sector has a role. Something like Tallahassee Forward or a collective impact forum has a role in this. But where it really hits a road, and I know that Freddy and ECHO do what's called case management. They listen to the person. What's your problem? Do you have a drug problem? Do you have a child care problem? Are you taking care of an elderly parent? What's keeping you from your potential? And so that case management, if we can help everybody achieve their potential to provide service to others and be rewarded for the service that they provide, then we can have a community that's really connected and really works, and people aren't just working for a minimum wage, but they're working for a living wage. And we call these summits Prosperity for All. We didn't call it a poverty summit because what we want is prosperity for all. If the 43% of our population that's the kind of working, working but can't make a adequate living, are still job insecure, food insecure, that's a lot of folks. And then the other 57% are one health crisis or car repair away from potentially losing their home and being homeless. So everybody's here. And if all those people have a living wage and are doing good things in their community, then every business is going to benefit. Every investor is going to benefit. And so it's prosperity for all, but it starts at the bottom and extends to the top rather than the other way around, which hasn't happened very often.
I think Talethia has rejoined us now after we got the unfrozen thing out of the way there. Talethia, one of the issues that we talk about very frequently is the need for more entrepreneurship in a lot of these neighborhoods that are underserved when it comes to whether they're food deserts or there are other products or services that are few and far between in those areas. Whereas in the old Jim Crow era, you had a lot of folks to say, well, heck, the white folks aren't going to help us. We're going to start our own businesses and provide those sorts of things there. That is no longer, of course, an imperative, But do you see that as maybe a way to revitalize some of these areas, is get more of the folks who live there to actually provide some of the products and services that are needed in their neighborhoods?
Yeah, I do. I think the word entrepreneurship gets a little bit scary. So I tell people, let's be ingenuitive, right? So use what's in your hand and very simple. And that if I can cook or bake, right? Maybe I utilize that skill to help them bring money. And so we've gotten so commercialized in how we see businesses and who we support and what we do. But I think some of that needs to return, that we need to remember the things that we're good at or what's in our hands, so to speak. Even the growers, like I'm not a grower. Everything I try to grow is like brown. I can't do it, right? But if you bring it to my table, I can cook it. So I believe that part of this, when we're talking ground level, Tom, you just mentioned that, is in empowering individuals living in poverty to be ingenuitive. You know how many people can braid hair? Like I can't braid hair, but that is a viable business. That if someone was to braid hair, if they thought about it in terms of numbers, they could make more money braiding hair consistently than actually going to work one of those, kind of menial $10 an hour job, if they were to think about what it takes and to set it up very properly, right? And so again, it goes back. I think that entrepreneurship, ingenuity, using what's in your hand, whatever we want to do to make it less threatening, is what we need to talk about. How do we build collective even in that? So I'm a mother who has 5 children born in July, right? Do you bake cakes? Can I buy my cakes from you instead of going to Publix? And some might say that I'm not right about that. But if we want to talk about poverty reduction, we got to talk about utilizing people and sharing money in a way that it's going to get back in the hands of the people who need it. So I'm all for it. I think that it is definitely a way to go. One of the things I'm going to share, because I'm working on it and it's developing and it's in my head, is this. I'm developing a nonprofit called the Hand Up Project, and it's an anti-poverty organization. But my main focus, what I begin to see, and I didn't want a nonprofit, but I realized I'm going to need money to do what I'm doing. But what I'm seeing is that lack of empowerment of people, like feeling that they can. And I know part of it I'm seeing in the school, so it'll be mostly geared to parents and family, and teaching advocacy and empowering families with these skills, because I do believe they can be taught. And it may never be to the level that you're doing this big policy, but empowerment to speak up and advocate in your own personal life, and then for your family, then community, and it translate. And I'm noticing statewide that this is the issue, that people don't feel empowered enough to do anything. It may be that they have a skill, but they don't feel that that skill is valuable, right? So how do we begin to educate, equip, and empower individuals who are living in poverty to know that they can have a hand in actually moving themselves to the next level? Just a few skills and a little bit of empowerment that'll move them there. And so I'm hopefully I'm developing what I'm calling the Starfish Framework. You've heard the story, you cut off a piece of a starfish, you get a new one. And so that is the hope, is to replicate this kind of empowerment and advocacy throughout this state. Of course, I'm local here, but throughout the state, so that we can build strong people living in the communities like ours. So you see more of us, and more of us going to mean more change.
I want to find out. Yeah, go ahead, Miaisha. Kick in.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Talethia, you're right on with that, because over in the Griffin Heights area, which is really high level 32304 for real, we are trying now to do a resource and wellness center, right where the Bond Community Health Center used to be. And that is targeting families just to do what you talked about: capacity building, leadership development, entrepreneurship opportunities for folks who typically have not had that at their fingertips, but also linking them up, as Freddy mentioned, with the resources they need. A lot of people don't know where to go, who to see, but we know one thing that is relevant to the people in this area is they would like to see a place where they could actually come and get that learning, some training and education. But what I've found is when you bring that type of orientation and ask for funding, nobody wants to fund it. Nobody thinks that's as important, because it's a long-term thing. You're building capacity. You're talking about human capital here. as opposed to the development we've been dealing with in terms of brick and mortar. So the more we can focus on human capital and really realizing how important that is, we can have all the great buildings we want, but if we don't have our people, you know, who need to have these levels of skills, training, and ability to advocate and have their voices heard, it won't work. It won't be effective. So you can help bring all resources to people that you want, but they have to batch it with some skill sets. And that's what I'd like to see happen in that area. Because one of the things people have said is that they want to reduce the area that has the highest utilization of people who go to the emergency room for primary care. Most people don't have primary care docs in that area. Something is going on. We need to find out what to do. And the people in that area can actually act in so many ways. One thing real sure, I'm going to be short with this, I thought, in terms of ideas and creation, is that I remember when I was going to school, we never had hired resource officers. We had parent volunteers. You know, when our moms and dads came to school, that was on. There was no nonsense then. We wouldn't have to worry about reinforcing anything. But to have trained parents who are volunteers who get paid like a resource officer, maybe not even much, but the time put in. But you want to get parents in that network so that they become the eyes of the school and the children know that their parents are coming to school. So you're killing a lot of birds with that stone. You know, you're giving the people a job, you're getting children to respect their parents coming into the school system gets the support it needs, you know, and it's that kind of thing builds community. Community schools, that's what the model ought to be. And we're not following that track at all very well. So I suggest we do something on that level.
Thank you, Miaisha.
Okay, I'd like to build on what both Talethia and Miaisha were saying. And this, a lot of people, when they hear the word entrepreneur, have in mind, oh, I'm going to start my own business and I'm going to do everything myself and I'm going to make a lot of money. And there's a lot more likelihood of success if Talethia or somebody, you know, loves to cook, you know, going and getting a job and getting minimum wage, you know, cooking is not the future that you want. What we want is people to, rather than starting a business on their own, let's say they like to cook, they like to do plumbing, they like to do, you know, whatever it is, go in to a business with a business idea and say, I want you to pay me a living wage and a percentage of the profit that I create. And so if we had more worker cooperatives, if we had more profit sharing, if we had more kind of reward for the more work that we do and the more sales that we make or whatever that is, then everybody, rather than a business of 100 people with one person profiting from being an entrepreneur, everybody can be an entrepreneur and really have the incentives and the benefits and the prestige and self-esteem. And so I think that, you know, if every business in Tallahassee, you know, really opened up and said, who can help me do better? And I'm going to reward you for, you know, us having more business, we'd have a win-win situation and prosperity.
Right.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Tom, I think what you're talking about is, in some contexts, entitled enlightened capitalism. I have heard that term thrown around before. Maybe that's something that should be not on the graduate level. That should be a freshman 101 course if you go into Florida State or Florida A&M or Tallahassee Community College. Folks, we are running short on time. Before I invite Bart to give us one more preview of what is coming up here later this week as far as the Prosperity for All Summit is concerned, let me give everyone an opportunity just in a brief moment for any final thoughts. Miaisha Mitchell, let's start with you first.
Yeah, just equity for all. Put equity in every lens that you have right about now, because that will help propel us to prosperity for all.
Thank you. Tom Taylor, your thoughts, please, sir.
Echoing Miaisha, I want everyone to receive the benefits for the good contributions they make, not only kind of in the commercial area, but also in the schools and wherever it is that they can contribute.
Thank you, sir. Talethia Edwards, final thoughts from you, ma'am, please.
Yes, just to build a little bit on that, I would love for us as a community to begin to think, move from the realm of community engagement and move to the realm of community development, where we're thinking about people and place together. And so if we begin to do that, I think we're really going to find prosperity and equity for all.
Words have power. Thanks, Talethia. Freddy Branham, your turn.
I mean, I think the definition here, it's resources. And I think the way you get to resources is through relationships. And so when we know who's got those relationships and who's got those linkages to the resources, that's when you're able to see substantial shifts in what people have to build on in the first place.
Thank you, sir. And from iHOPE Inc., Bart Bilber, tell us more again about the upcoming Prosperity for All Summit that you got in the works for this week.
Well, a couple closing comments. I just want to emphasize that I think that the most successful and attractive communities will be those that, number one, work together to reduce poverty. Secondly, learn to understand the challenges of those in poverty and help them out. And three, confront implicit bias and institutional racism. We know that a lot of our issues here are historically racially caused. The income level of whites is about 49,000 and for blacks about 28,000 here in Leon County. So that's another issue that we need to discuss in an open way or we'll never address it. I would also say that the 32304 summits were 32304 plus. And the reason for the plus is to make sure people understand it was not intended to only focus on 32304, and the recommendations of that report are useful throughout the county. And so thank you so much, Tom, for having us on today. I hope folks will join in the conversation on Friday, starting at 9:30, united to ensure prosperity for all of Leon County.
Thank you, Bart, and thanks to all the members of the panel today. A fascinating discussion and much success as the endeavor moves forward and hopefully brings more and more community members and resources and enthusiasm to the front. And thank you all for being a part of Perspectives Today, which is, by the way, produced by WFSU Public Media in Tallahassee. Thanks to Taylor Cox, Paul Dam, Amy Diaz de Villegas, Brandon Brown, Tricia Moynihan, and Lydell Rawls. Our Director of Content, Kim Kelly, back there on the Executive Producer chair, and I'm Tom Flanagan. We began the month talking with some local women who have succeeded in the construction arena, and we're going to wind up the month next week with several women who have done extraordinary things in the human services and community involvement world. Hope you can join us as we talk about it next week right here on Perspectives from WFSU Public Media.